Hello, good afternoon, and happy Mother's Day to everyone. We're going to look at several passages today concerning Jesus and his relationship with his mother. And so if you have your Bibles, you can turn to, let's start in Matthew chapter 2. We're going to talk about what it was like for Mary at the coming of the wise men and various other things. But first of all, I want to talk for a minute about my mom and my wife's mom. This Mother's Day is very unusual for me because my wife's mom just went to be with the Lord recently, and she's having her first Mother's Day without her mother here. And this morning when I got up and was praying, I decided to go in and talk to my wife a little bit and just spend a few minutes with her. And of course she was crying, and she was looking at some videos of her mother, which she's done quite a bit lately. And most of you probably listening to this will, you know me, and a lot of you will know who my wife is, who her mother is, but some of you may not. But my wife's mother went through a long battle with dementia and Parkinson's, and it was an amazing time for me because I had the opportunity to see a person I'm sorry. I don't know of anything that I've ever... I'm trying to get composure here. I apologize. I really don't like being so emotional. I'm trying to do otherwise, but I need to tell this story, and it's just emotional for me. So, bear with me. I don't think I've ever seen anything that made me as emotional as this has. I love my wife very much, and she has had a huge impact on my life, and in a lot of ways, but never any more so than in watching her take care of and deal with her mom these last few years. And you know, I've seen and been around people at the end of their life before several times, and for the most part, it's been handled fairly well. But I have seen and heard of people that around their parents' last days, they on earth, they do some pretty ugly things sometimes. And I've had the opportunity during this process that my wife went through to see a family deal with something with pure love and doing things the right way. And such a blessing. And my wife asked me this morning something like, she said, I just keep thinking I could have done more. And I just said, well, sweetheart, I don't see how. I said, because you dealt with all this with love and dedication and determination, and you did it because you wanted to. And and I told her this morning, I said, you have had a huge impact on my life. And I want to also show you behind me here, I have a picture of, that's my mom and my dad. And that's my wife and myself and her mom and dad, those pictures right there. And I don't know how well you can see them, but that's our mothers. And I'm going to go through a few verses here and talk about Jesus and his relationship with his mom. But I just want to say that I love my mom in a way that, and you love your mom. We love our moms in ways that you can't love anyone else, because they do things for you that no one else does for you. And they go through things for you, and they're willing innately to do things that no other human being on earth is willing to do. And they know things about you that no one else knows. And they pray for you, they love you, they're willing to die for you. And so these are, it's a wonderful day. And one of the greatest days that's on the calendar is the day that we celebrate Mother's Day. And I think I see my mom's face. I'm not sure. But anyway, I know my mom will watch this, and I just want you to know, Mom, I love you. And I appreciate all that you've done for me. And that my mom is a truly amazing woman. I want to say a few things about her. First of all, I've never heard her complain about any pain or suffering, and my dad tells me that while she was pregnant, that she never complained about that. And that's a pretty interesting thing. It's an exciting thing to know, and it's a wonderful thing to know about a person. Anyway, what a great privilege it is to have a great mom. And so many things I can think of, but one of the first things I think of is that as a child, if I were not feeling well, my mom was right there. And my mom has always been right there for me in every circumstance. And a great thing. So let's look in the scriptures about Jesus and his relationship with his mom. The first thing I want to talk about is that when Jesus was born, and even prior to his birth, there was a lot of things happening that Mary, his mother, dealt with that other mothers don't have to deal with, but they do in a sense. And I want to talk about the things that a mother knows that no one else knows. There's a lot of difficult things that surround giving birth that men can never know anything about. And it's impossible to even really talk about it. What it feels like to know that you have a life inside you. What it feels like to feel that life grow and know that a human being is growing inside your body, and feel them begin to move. And then the whole birth process, what a woman goes through to bring a child into the world. And I've seen it over and over again. And I can, forgive me for, I've been crying here a little bit. I don't mean to be overly emotional, but it's an emotional subject. And, but anyway, I remember how it felt the first time I held my children in my arm and my grandchildren in my arms. And I remember that the first time that happens to you, you don't know how you're going to feel. But when you hold flesh of your flesh and blood, bone, a product of your own body, there's a love that is that happens there that you can't fully describe. Well, I can only understand that so far because a mother has that life growing in them all those years, and then they give birth to this baby, and it's there, and you see it all the time. You see the look in their face, and we all know that from that moment forward, a mother's, in her mind, her life is not as important as that life, and she acts that way. And you know that a mother will kill you over her baby. She will put her life on the line for that child. And I saw, of course, in these last 2 or 3 years, I saw my wife take on almost the role of a mom to her mom. What a beautiful thing that was to see. And it's hard for me to talk about it without getting emotional, but it's a life transforming thing to see someone love someone else to that degree. So anyway, let's talk for a few minutes about what Mary went through and what her relationship with Jesus was. The first thing that I think about is let's think about some of the things that happened. One of the things that happened is that when she was near to be delivered, she had to make a long journey riding on an animal, a small, like a donkey, I think, and traveled quite a distance. And there was no place nice for them to stay, and Jesus was born in a stable. And they used a manger, a place where you feed the animals, and put straw and wrapped him in as they said, swaddling clothes or a blanket type thing, and put him in a manger. That was his first bed. And then the Bible says that there were shepherds out in the fields at night watching their flocks. And the angels of the Lord came to them and told them about this baby and said, follow the star. And they did. And they found Mary and Joseph and the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, laying in this manger. And I want to try to, let's put ourselves for a moment in Mary's body for a moment and think. She's sitting there, newborn baby, in a manger, a barn. And she's got her newborn baby that she knows, first of all, came into her body without having ever known a man or had sex. She knew this was a baby that came from God. And she knew this like no one else could know it. Other people, you can hear this in your ears, and there is a certain amount of difficulty in believing that attached with it. But she didn't have that problem. She knew it to be true. And all mothers know things about how their babies came to be that no one else does. So as a mother, she's looking at this baby, and these guys show up. They're shepherds, and they show up, and they've been sent there by the angels of God. And they start telling her all these things. And as a mother watches her child grow, she sees things and she watches them, and she realizes she's launched a human being into the world, and she really doesn't know exactly what they're going to be like, what they're going to say, what they're going to do, who they're going to marry, what kind of career they're going to have, or if they're going to be successful, or if they're going to be these personality traits. But no matter what they are, they love you, and they do anything for you. And so Mary's just watching these things happen in awe. These people just show up in the night, sent by angels to praise her new baby. And so the Bible says in verse number 11 of chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2 and verse 11 says, and when they were coming to the house, this is the wise men. This is about the wise men. Let me reset this and talk about that story for a second. I've already talked about the shepherds, but the wise men. Let's talk about the wise men for a second here. These were kings, and they came evidently with a big, a lot of people with them, as kings would. And if you read the story, and I'm not going to go into the deep details of it, but if you read the story, you'll see that it's very likely that by this time they were in a house, and Jesus was about 2 years old the time the wise men came. And there were they stirred up the whole city. And they came to the house, and they brought these kings showed up at their house, and it's pretty clear that they didn't have they had a modest house. and these great men of wealth show up at their little modest house and bring all these gifts for him. And then they're warned of God in a dream, and they go back another way and don't let the King Herod know what has happened. And King Herod, as a result of this, gets angry with them, and God has to warn Joseph in a dream to take Mary and Jesus and to flee to Egypt, because he knows that the king is going to come and destroy all the children from 2 years old and younger in the city and area where they live. And so I'm telling all this because I want you to put yourself in Mary's place, the mother of Jesus. And she sees all these things, these amazing things happen as a result of her son, this young child in her house. And so she, let's just go through those events for a second. When she was a young girl, the angel came to her and said, I know you're a virgin, but you're going to have a baby. And she said, okay. And she conceived without having the benefit of a man involved. She knew that like no one else could. She brings forth this baby, and out of the night, lay it in a strange place in a manger. Shepherds show up and worship this baby and tell her, and she takes all those sayings in. And then when the baby is 2 years old, kings show up from the east to give gifts to this child and to worship this child. And then the angel of God has to warn them to flee, and they flee to Egypt because the angel of the Lord knows, or God knows, that King Herod of their area is going to destroy a large group of children, trying to destroy this child. And Mary's watching all this, I'm sure, in faith, but in amazement. Now, the next thing that happens, I'm going to turn to, let's see here. I'm going to turn to the book of Luke, and where he talks about the shepherds, he says this thing about Mary. In Luke chapter 2 and verse number 19, but Mary kept all these sayings, kept these things, and pondered them in her heart. And that's what a mother does. She thinks deeply about these things. There's not much she can say about it, but she ponders these things deeply in her heart. Now, the next story I want to talk about for a few moments is the boy Jesus in the temple. Evidently, they were on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and while they were there, Jesus goes to the temple and he's talking to the rulers. He's just 12 years old, it says, and he's talking to the rulers, and they're amazed. They're amazed at the way he is able to interact with men, and men of religion and men of study, and he's reacting with them. And again, it says in verse 51 of chapter 2 of the book of Luke, and he went down with them, and he came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them, his mother, and he kept all these sayings in her heart. She kept all these sayings in her heart. So these things are building in her heart. And then I want to look at John chapter 2. This is a very interesting story. And the third day, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee. At this time now, Jesus is 30 years of age. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said unto him, they have no wine. Now, this is amusing to me, because Jesus has not performed any miracles yet. He started gathering his disciples, and they are invited to this wedding. And his mother comes to him and says, they don't have any wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. And so I'm kind of interpreting this, or reading between the lines. But Jesus is there, his disciples are there, and they don't have any wine, they're out of wine. And Mary comes to him, his mother comes to him and says, they don't have any wine. And he says, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. So there's a communication there. She knows, obviously, that he can do something about it. And he knows, she knows that. And he says, my hour isn't come yet. And here's her reaction. I love this. Verse 5, his mother says, she doesn't even respond to that. Jesus says, it's not my hour. She doesn't even respond to that to him. She looks around, and his mother said unto the servants, whatever he tells you to do, do it. And leaves. So the servants are there. Jesus is there. She comes to Jesus, says, they don't have any wine. He says, what do you want me to do about that? And so she doesn't even respond to that. She just looks at the servants and says, do whatever he says. And then she turns around and walks away. And it says that Jesus looks around and there's 6 water pots of stone. And it says they contain 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Now I looked that up, and that's big, pretty good sized pots. I think it's something like, I can't remember exactly, but I think it's something like 6 gallons, or it's a pretty good sized pot. And Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up. And then he said, draw out now and bear to the governor of the feast. And they did. And when the ruler of the feast tasted the water that was made wine, they said, but they didn't know where it came from. He said, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, that which is worse. But thou hast good wine. And now I can see this situation where he says, why'd you save the good wine till the last? He said, usually people serve the best first, and then when people have had enough that they don't really care very much anymore, they bring out the worst, but you saved the best for the last. And so this is the first miracle that Jesus performed, and very unusual. Now let's talk for a minute about the relationship with the mother, because your mom is like this. She knows you like no one else knows you. She loves you and has a relationship with you, a symbiotic relationship, a deep relationship with you that no one else has. She understands you like no one else does. God knows we need moms, and Jesus needed a mom, and he had a great one, obviously. Now, this is a little sadder. We're going to turn, as we wrap up our lesson here, let's turn to the book of John. And we're going to look at John chapter 19 and verse number 17. And let me just say that God has set life up so that there is an end to it. There's a birth and there's a death. We all have that to face. We don't understand it. We don't know why it is that way, but we all know it's that way. And Jesus, the creator of the universe, also had to die. And like him, we all will be part of a resurrection as well. But here's the point I want to make with this particular story. We're going to read from verse 17. I'm going to read a few verses, and we're going to talk about this, and the last thing we're going to do with today's lesson. Jesus was, in verse 17, was bearing his cross. And he had to go up this hill. And then they put a banner above him that said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Now, we know that story, and I'm not going to go through the details of that part, but Jesus is in the middle of his crucifixion. And during this time, his mother is watching. And this whole story, the whole lesson here is about that relationship. His mother is watching. And I want to, again, try to put ourselves as best we can in her situation and see how she feels. She's watching her son treated in a way that's beyond our imagination. And when it's quite frankly harder for all of us to see people we love go through something than it is for us to go through it ourselves. And man, it's hard for me to tell. As I was watching my wife and my father-in-law and her family go through, it was harder for them. That's harder to watch than going through it yourself, because you love these people. But it changes who you are when you see it changes who you are when you see people do things out of a love that they didn't even know they had, a depth of love they didn't realize was in them. And again, I want to point to these pictures I have. These women here, my mama and my wife's mom in these pictures. How else could we know what love is like if it wasn't for these people that God puts in our life? And maybe some of you are listening to this and your mom has already passed. So you've already been through this. You know how that feels. I still have my mom, thank the Lord. But I was there when my dad lost his mom. I was there when my mom lost her mom. And so I had the opportunity to see how that was. And I saw them in a state that I've never seen them at any other time in their life. And I'll just say this while it's on my mind. You don't get over those things. You don't get past those things. You just get through them. And you don't even know how you have the grace to get through them, but God gives you the grace, and God works in your mind and in your heart. And He, as my wife and I, as I told you, were talking about that this morning, and she was asking me, she was saying to me, I don't know if I did enough. I said, you never feel like you've done enough, but that's really not the point. And so anyway, when Jesus was hanging there on the cross, one of the last things He did, and I'm going to read this, verse 26. When Jesus therefore saw His mother, He's hanging on the cross, He looks down and there's His mother, and I'm sure she was weeping as well. And He saw His disciple. Most people believe it's John. It's insinuating that it's John, the disciple whom He loved. And He looks at her and He said, "Woman, behold thy son." And then He looked at the disciple and He said, "Behold thy mother." So right before He died, one of the last things He did was make sure His mother was taken care of. And soon after that, He said, "It is finished." This has been a very difficult lesson for me to teach, a lot harder than I thought it was. And I just want to say this. This is something everybody can identify with, because God gives us all moms, obviously. And maybe you're listening right now and you still have your mom. Maybe you've recently lost your mom, or maybe it's been quite some time. But the main thing I want to get said today is that there is no love on this earth like the love of a mom. And I've watched it. Of course, I'm not a mom, but I've seen it. And I know, we have a friend, April, just gave birth. And we have, and my wife's mom having just gone to heaven. My mom, I talked to her this morning. These people, they show us what the love of Christ is, that completely unselfish giving of all you have love that exists on this earth. So, forgive me for this being so hard for me, but it's just emotional. I love my mom, and I love my wife, and I love Helen too. By the way, those of you whose mothers have gone to be with the Lord, I just want you to know that they're your biggest cheerleaders. And you may have a hard time believing this, but it's true. They're watching you today. They can see you better than they could while they were still here. And they are praying for you. They are watching you. And rest assured, you're going to see them again. This life that we're living, if that's all there was, that would be pretty sad, wouldn't it? But we have eternity to spend with them. So let me just close by saying, look, love your mom. Make sure that she knows you love her. Think about her. And if your mom has already gone on to heaven, know that she loves you and she's praying for you and she's still watching you. And for all you moms out there, thank you. Thank you for all you do. And God bless you. And pray for our moms and pray for all that we will be, what we should be for them. Y'all have a great day.